Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's Thursday. I don't know why I say that. It's 3 weeks in a row. I'll try to get new material next week, but every now and then I get stuck in a rut. And while we're talking about ruts, I guess we have to talk about Professor Erwin Chemerinsky. Chemerinsky is a constitutional law scholar. He is it the UC Davis School of Law? Where is he dean right now, Mike? Do you recall?
It may be Berkeley.
He's a dean of a law student, brilliant scholar. He's written a textbook on constitutional law, which I've read. He's written a very good Horn book summarizing First Amendment law, which I've read. He gives speeches and talks around the country. He's an expert on 42 United States Code, Section 1983, the so-called state action, our Ku Klux Klan Act that permits individuals to sue the government when the government violates rights, federal rights of theirs. He's a good speaker. He knows the law. He's been in front of the United States Supreme Court any number of times. But when it comes to Trump v. Anderson, the Colorado case, he's lost his mind. And what was once a subtle constitutional wit has become a dull tool. He's written an op-ed piece that has appeared in any number of papers around the country. A piece that he wrote appeared in the Sacramento Bee and surfaced on our radar the other night. And in it,
the Miami Herald, the News and Observer out of Raleigh, North Carolina. It's been sort of syndicated and sent everywhere. So I'm sure that if you've got a local publication or a local rag that you from time to time look at, you'll be able to find this piece in there.
As opposed to the sounds of our dulcet tones here, where we break down the world in subtle and meaningful terms, as opposed to those local rags that you make your cats pee on. But in any case, Chemerinsky's view is that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is self-executing, and that the Supreme Court, if it rejects and reverses Colorado's decision saying that Trump should be off the ballot, that somehow they will have done violence to the United States Constitution. I just don't see it, Professor, or Dean, or Erwin, or Mr. Chemerinsky, depending on the context. And I wonder what you're missing. You rely, Professor, on the following analogy. If a person has twice been served as president and he walks into a clerk's office and says, I want to be on the ballot, well, we have an amendment that prohibits a person from serving 3 times. The person would say you're ineligible. If a person walks into the clerk's office and he produces a birth certificate saying I was born in Vietnam, then you're not a natural born citizen. And I know, Jackson Barrett, this is going to make you go bing, 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 bing. They're on it. Let's talk. You're not a natural born citizen within the meaning of the law. You're ineligible. If you show that same birth certificate and you're Mike's age, 33, not yet 35, you're ineligible. These are all ministerial acts that require the exercise of no judgment. You look at a birth certificate, it's a public record, it's reliable. And by the plain text and meaning of the Constitution, a person under the age of 35 can't run. They are ineligible. By the plain meaning of the Constitution, a person not born in the United States is ineligible. By the plain meaning of the Constitution, a person who has served twice before is ineligible. Now, should that person be Donald Trump or whoever it is, they've come in, they're seeking the 3rd term. Do you need a public record with a raised seal that says this person has twice been president? Or are there some things that are so well known in the world at large that they're just taken as given? And I'm referring obliquely to a concept that is used in trial law called judicial notice. When parties go into court to prove a case, they obviously need evidence, and evidence typically has to have a foundation. It has to be reliable. It has to meet the standards of the Code of Evidence. So we don't need to prove everything, though. The court can take judicial notice of some facts, and those facts are facts that usually are of common knowledge, that there's no serious dispute about them. And so thus, in the case of a person twice having served as president, presumably the citizenry at large is capable of reaching that conclusion without evidentiary proof. And it would certainly be something that judicial notice might be taken of in a proceeding. So in these 3 instances, having served twice before, being born outside the United States, being too young to serve in that office, a clerk at a clerk's office could easily make a determination that this person is ineligible by the text of the Constitution and the plain and ordinary meanings of those words. It's a no-brainer. Chemerinsky thinks that reaching the conclusion that Trump engaged in insurrection is similar. And in that regard, Chemerinsky shows himself to be an ideological tool. If you want to see someone blinded by Trump derangement syndrome and ask yourself whether this can happen even to the smartest guy in the room, read Chemerinsky's piece. Mike, you've highlighted a piece.
I wanted to read this because this sort of this highlights the best to me of the sort of lobotomy that he suffered, pursuant to TDS. He said, and this is a dean of a law school and not a tier 3 or a tier 2 law school either, which is, I think, particularly troubling for me. But it says the court's decision effectively erases Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, the court hasn't rendered its decision. It hasn't come down with a ruling on this case. It's heard oral arguments, and he is speaking specifically to oral arguments, the questions that the justices raised, and the answers that were given by the various counsel, and then says this: the court's decision effectively erases Section 3 of the 14th Amendment from the Constitution. The text of the provision is clear. A person is disqualified from being an officer of the United States if, having taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, they participate in an insurrection. Now, before I get to the next sentence, is that an accurate summary of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, Norm?
It serves for these purposes. I think what the 14th Amendment says is that if a person engages in insurrection, and so is engage a synonym for participate. Participate is a little more passive, but I'll give Chemerinsky the benefit of the doubt on that. Or they aid and comfort the enemies of the United States. He's not relying on that. I'll accept that as a paraphrase, Mike, for purposes of this piece.
Trump took such an oath and played a key role in the insurrection of January 6th.
And this is where the rubber meets the road and where the case becomes difficult. The best case that I have been able to see or read about with respect to Trump and January 6th is that he encouraged the crowd and then did nothing to stop the crowd from acting once he realized the crowd got out of control. And I just don't view that as insurrection, as a matter of law. And frankly, no court case, no judicial proceeding has found Trump legally responsible for the insurrection. A political judgment has been made, and that political judgment may be correct. When he stood on the ellipse and had tens of thousands of people there and promised to join them at the Capitol and said, if we don't stop Mike Pence, we won't have a country anymore. We've got to fight like hell. When he said all that Newt Rockney stuff in the locker room, he was basically firing up his team. And when the team went out there and they did more than protest, they stormed the barricades and some of them entered the Capitol and there was some violence. Does Trump bear a legal responsibility for inciting them to violence? Nobody has charged him with that. And the reason for that no one has charged him with that is that would be a failing case. He did not say, go and storm the Capitol. He came close, and there are lines, and those lines get drawn. And maybe I give him the benefit of the doubt, and that he's not entitled to. That's okay too. But the point is, no clerk at the front desk of a Secretary of State's office should be able to look at this contested piece of data and reach their own conclusion about whether Trump is eligible or not.
Well, and again, in Colorado, it was the Secretary of State who was the respondent in the case. So the Secretary of State of Colorado did not, and I'm not saying this just because I'm not picking on you, Norm, but the main case was that, right? The Secretary of State in Maine attempting to remove Trump's name from the ballot was a case of the one that you're characterizing now. In the Colorado case, we do have a very elaborate sort of, I don't want to call it evidentiary, I guess, supposition. I want to refer back to what you were calling in terms of judicial notice, but the original lawsuit funded by several different NGOs. And I think I made mention of this at the time. It was a very thorough and thick filing, very, very, very hefty filing that the court was presented in that case, trying to prove by some sort of weird evidentiary standard that Trump did in fact engage in an insurrection. And for that reason, he should be removed from the ballot. And the Supreme Court of Colorado found that he, in fact, did not engage in an insurrection in the lower court, and then it was appealed, and then I think there was a finding to the contrary. So all of this, what he is appealing to right now, Norm, in my opinion, is this notion that about half the country would agree with the conclusion without any sort of substantive or evidentiary standard to abide, or even a mere agreement on what is an objective criteria for us to judge, right? And in the absence of other formal proceedings out in the ether, right, a la some sort of impeachment inquiry, of which he was subjected to 3, Trump was subjected to 3. I think the issue that we have here is that Chemerinsky, who is supposed to sort of hold part of the cradle of American jurisprudence as a dean of an elite tier law school, right? And someone who has participated in the treatises that you referred to earlier in this stream, and who has such a loud microphone when it comes to being able to get opinion pieces published all over the country for mass consumption. For him to make such a lazy analysis and conclude the way that he did here is a complete miscarriage of his position.
Yeah, it really is. And he needs to be called out for it. I mean, I'm looking at some of the comments this morning. I think that that Janet makes a good point. You know, he's given a permission slip giving a permission slip to the tribe to make foolish arguments. It's the credentials, not substance, that keep the tribe on the same page. You know, I don't know what it is. You know, but he's preaching to a choir, and at least we aren't responding with the call in response.
But
I think Chemerinsky's.
If I understand Janet's comment here, then it's more of sort of an instruction manual, some sort of like cocktail party note card that people can kind of keep with them, because they're not going to be responsible for any sort of, you know, they're not going to be responsible for custody of any sort of legal standard or the finer and nuanced points around it. It's just, hey, you know, Article 3, Section 14, right?
Well, here's an irony point for those of you who want to make people's head explode at the water cooler. You know, when it comes time to evaluating constitutional doctrines, you make commitments on what sorts of theories, as you interpret the Constitution, will inform ambiguous terms. And there is a liberal theory called democracy reinforcing norms. This is advanced by Cass Sunstein in his book, How to Interpret the Constitution. And so basically what Chemerinsky fears the court is going to do is succumb to the liberal interpretive canons, and that is interpret Section 3 of the 14th Amendment according to democracy enforcing norms. Depriving the people of their choice would be anti-democratic, Chemerinsky criticizes the court for saying, or implying, at least in its responses to questions. Chemerinsky's got a reckoning coming. His head's going to explode. I look forward to reading a law review article from him, a reasoned analysis, and getting away from the gibberish. While we
before we move on, I just want to recognize a few comments. Hans points out, you know, he was not impeached, so political judgment was not an insurrection. I think that that's a fair point. Jackson Barrett has I like the phrasing of this quite a lot. He says, we have to push back on false narratives being, quote, authenticated by legal pleadings, which is exactly the case that I was describing in terms of the Colorado proceedings. That lawsuit was as close to what he just said, a false narrative being authenticated via legal pleadings in the raw, right? And so I like the phrasing. I like the way that sets up T offers. All this article does is reinforce that universities have become the major contributor to the rot in the legal system. They're broken. And then in the cloud, asks a question, and then also follows up with a point. And what could he have said to them to stop them from going into the Capitol? In my opinion, there was no reasoning with them in the heat of the moment. Did they expect him to show up with a megaphone? And I guess my counter to that is, I don't even necessarily think that getting bogged down in the facts of the day at this point serve any utility to what's really broken here. Is that whole scenario factually could have been substantively different, and it's my analysis and my observation that we would still be in the same position here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in response to the question, what could he have done? The best argument that I can muster, based on what I've read at least, is that you know, once he finally encouraged people to leave, the crowd did leave. And you know, Ben Hamilton in his book, you know, We Stormed the Capitol. Sorry, guys, we stormed the Capitol. Says that a number of people on the ground at that site at that time left when they said they got a tweet or saw a tweet from Donald Trump. I still take the view, and this is informed largely by my participation in the Proud Boys trial, that this was an angry, agitated crowd that snapped and did what crowds sometimes do. It went wild and rioted, and I don't think there was an insurrection or a plan. I just don't, and nothing that I've seen. I read the Stewart Rhodes trial transcript. I was a participant in the Proud Boys trial. I've read the House Committee report. I've read Julie Kelly's book. I've read Ben Hamilton's book. I continue to read widely on this topic. I read the book just the other day about Fannie Willis, by Michael Isikoff. No one has proved that this was a planned insurrection. Was there a desire that things turn out differently? Yes. Were people agitated and angry? Yeah. But if there was a planned insurrection, we're still missing the blueprint. Hey, so it was an insult on democracy, was it? You stormed the temple of democracy. You tampered with a sacred institution, aka the peaceful transfer.
I apologize. I just have to give Junior a moment in the sun here. Hopefully this gives you your moment here, Junior. You're welcome. All right, sorry.
Okay, we interfered with the peaceful transfer of power, and nothing, and thus we need to prosecute hundreds of Americans, if not thousands. Thus, we need hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans to have criminal records. We need to send men and women to prison. We need to show the world that we stand tall for democracy. Do we? Well, while Congress and the Senate are debating whether to send tens of billions of dollars more to the Ukraine, what did our favorite comedic Democrat in the Ukraine do? He in Parliament extended martial law. And oh, by the way, that election we were supposed to have in 2024, niet, or whatever the equivalent is in Ukrainian. So, I mean, you just can't. Mike sent me this story, and I thought it was satire. I thought it was something from the Babylon Bee. I mean, and that's the problem, with living in our times. Every now and then I'll read the Babylon Bee and I'll think, really? That happened? And I realize, no, wait, that's satire. Apparently the Ukraine has canceled its elections while we are pumping tens of billions of dollars into Ukraine for what? To fight for democracy against Russian aggression. You can't make this stuff up, Mike.
So the vote for martial law in this case is an extension, and I understand that it's happened consecutive times since February of 2022, and they run for 90 days. Parliament apparently has been completely rid of any of the opposition party, and so these votes in favor of an extension are merely procedural, right? They're almost ceremonial in nature. And I also understand that the term of president in Ukraine is 5 years. And so what this does by extending yet again martial law through, I think it's May, Ukraine is going to implicitly, by implication, miss and therefore cancel its March 31st, 2024 presidential election. So I've put one of the primary sources on the screen. I'm going to go back to Jordan. And I'm gonna butcher his name. I've seen it, 100 times on the internet, but I've never said it out loud. Shachel.
You're Butcherinskying him.
And he's highly credible. I've read a lot of him. He had a lot of reporting and journalistic efforts with respect to the COVID vaccinations and the Pfizer level involvement with our federal government back in 2021, 2022. But what he says here is pretty interesting. He says in November, a former Zelensky advisor named Oleksiy
Arestovich
announced that he would be challenging Zelensky for the presidency.
Again, you can't make this stuff up. Arestovich? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Arestovich, promising to focus on a negotiated settlement to end the war with Russia. Arestovich was fiercely critical of Zelensky's approach to the conflict, maintaining that a settlement was in the best interest of Ukrainians. Far from a pro-Moscow shill, the Russian government has an active arrest warrant out for Arestovich.
Arrest Arestovich!
But get
this. Arrest him!
Yet just days after his announcement...
Keep that cash cow bellowing. Joe Biden, I need $10 billion more.
But, however...
My southern estate in southern France... It needs new shutters.
After the announcement, Ukraine's national police force, under the direction of the Zelensky government, launched a criminal investigation against Arestovich. So not only do we have martial law declared to continue on the current iteration of Ukraine's presidency under the Zelensky cabinet, there was an opposition leader that was hostile to Russia, but articulated a platform that sought a resolution and an end to the war. And as such, that opposition candidate was arrested and put under criminal investigation by Ukraine's national police force prior to all of this happening.
Why, as Dawn points out, Zelensky is the Churchill of our time. Do not defame him. He might put you on a kill list. We shall fight in the coffee houses. We shall fight in the whorehouses. We shall fight in the comedy clubs. Oh, yes, we will never surrender. We will never give up. This is Mr. Zelensky speaking. I don't buy it for a minute.
So, in addition, Jordan, he goes on to say all opposition parties have been removed from the parliament, which I referenced earlier, and all non-state media has been banned from the airwaves. The paranoia-infused government has even signed into law a measure to ban all new Russian books from being imported into the country. So right now there is an informational sort of, I guess, what do you want to call this? A quarantine over top of Ukraine.
Here's what I want to know, Mike. Why are we reading about this? Why aren't we reading about this in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe? Why are we getting this online?
You tell me, Norm. I think that, I wouldn't be getting information really from traditional outlets anyway. So you're in a better position to ask the question. But it is interesting that, the referenced article here from NPR designates, Europe, right? And these aren't headlines per se. What I've also understood, Norm, recently is that I guess the Russian Orthodox Church has also been outlawed in Ukraine, and somebody can fact check me there. There's a lot going on here to subvert any sort of sovereign individual interest in Ukraine. Again, I compare this and really just want to merge this into the recognition from Cernovich just last week that basically 650,000 military-aged males fled Ukraine before the war started back in February of 22. And so it begs the question of what's really going on. I think before we got on this morning, Norm, I was wondering to myself really what was beyond what we're reading here, what's obvious. I think what I'm struggling with is that even in the wake of Tucker Carlson meeting with Putin and giving him an interview, and this information slowly leaking into the public consciousness, our southern border crisis being commingled with the Ukraine funding aspirations of those in Congress. I'm just curious as to why there is no one within the current administration or with any sort of political clout who is pro-Ukrainian war, pro-funding these efforts, that is communicating and articulating an updated and clear message as to the existential need for U.S. involvement in this war.
I hate to say it. I mean, I am coming. I generally avoid articles that say, the military-industrial complex, is the one who's profiting by this, because obviously selling arms is profitable. But I begin to appreciate the Ukraine conflict in an entirely different lens. It is the military-industrial complex that's getting rich selling weapons to the Ukraine to battle Russia. But for what reason? And I think most Americans don't care as long as these companies profit and employ Americans and return dividends to investors. The rubber will meet the road, and I think serious questions will arise when we're asked to send our children to shed blood in Ukraine. And I don't think it's going to happen. And candidly, after listening to Putin's interview with Carlson, he's persuaded me that the sort of pan-Slavic vision is antagonistic to the West, and he views NATO as trying to get a beachhead in Ukraine to establish a military presence on Russia's border in ways that he finds intolerable. and that historically Ukraine, there are claims, has been part of Russia, and Russia is seeking to protect its territorial reach. I don't have a problem with that. And when I hear Ukraine banning the Russian Orthodox Church, it sort of seems to confirm that this is really a conflict about pan-Slavism versus the West. The Russian Orthodox Church is that social and religious vehicle that presents to the West an image of the nature and destiny of man that's non-secular. And NATO and the West have adopted secularism. I'm not going to go so far as to call the Ukraine-Russia conflict a spiritual conflict. There are those who see the hand of God in everything. I don't. But I do think that these mundane concerns, who profits, why, are worth looking at. And I think when our major institutions, our journalistic institutions, ignore the fact that the very thing we're supposed to be fighting for over there has been suspended during the fight, that is democracy, free elections, at a time when we're prosecuting Americans and sending them to prison for a 3-hour riot on January 6th, we're sending tens of billions of dollars to a guy who just suspended his elections. I mean, I might be deaf, dumb, blind, stupid, and old, but I'm not that deaf, dumb, blind, stupid, and old. Wake up, people. There's something going on out there, and it just ain't right.
Imperius did a favor here. So Imperius says no children will go. They're just going to have all the illegals join the military and become citizens. So this is sort of, I guess, I tossed this off the glass to you, Imperius, and you're windmilling right now. This is sort of the nature of my inquiry with respect to the total lack or the just, blackout of any sort of coverage that would give a clear and concise vision for our involvement in what is becoming a really confusing war, right?
Well, it is.
And,
It is.
And so what I'm looking at here, and I apologize, my
oh, I ain't nothing but a hound dog. There's nothing the matter with that. Yeah. Ain't nothing but a hound dog. Is that your wife or your dog?
So the mass, and I know Laura Loomer is down in Panama right now, or has been, and she's reporting.
And the New York Times is trolling her.
Yeah, and I'll be paying attention to what she produces over the next several days. She's promising some fairly, I guess, shocking reporting, and I have no doubt I've seen a couple of the videos that she's posted since being there. But it does appear that a massive undertaking in logistics has been implemented to vacuum up all of the available military-aged males from war-torn regions around the world or otherwise impoverished regions around the world. And all of, we've got the Catholic Charities, we've got all sorts of other religious organizations and NGOs that are just facilitating the transfer of migrants from all over the world into what is, United States economic zone and jurisdiction. And it does beg the question of whether the United States is sort of signaling by consequence and behavior some sort of larger war, an expansion to what is going on in Ukraine by virtue of biding time sufficient to put all of these people in military uniforms and then deploy them abroad.
That's it. I mean, that's just, Hegel once had a line about the cunning of history, that somehow events have a way of going, so there are historiography, the study of history, what larger principles infuse it. There is something called the Whig interpretation of history, WHIG. And what that says is that history reflects a march of progress toward rationality and greater inclusion. And it informs notions like the metaphors like the arc of history being the arc of justice being long. And so history is said to have a meaning and a goal and an end, and events are interpreted to meeting that end. That, to my view, is a sort of quasi-conspiratorial view of history, much like saying that all these military age immigrants are appearing on our border, A, because we want to have them as potential fodder to throw in a war and make them citizens, or B, maybe they're sleeper cells for foreign intelligence agents who will be activated on command, and we'll have our own, I don't know, if they're not Manchurian candidates, what are they? I don't know, we'll have to come up with a new metaphor. I think the more likely answer is these are young men who have energy, are mobile, and have a desire to better their lives for themselves and their families, and are sent here with the mission to advance their own economic interests and send money home. That, to me, the simplest answer is usually the easiest. I hear what you're saying, Mike, and but I got to reject conspiracy theories because I think that's the easy way out.
Well, I don't know that it's too much of a conspiracy theory. Imperius doesn't necessarily agree with me either. Imperius responds that the war is against us. Why deploy abroad when your biggest enemy is here? I get that. What I'm saying is that there is no appetite among the general American public to fight war right now. And the traditional propaganda mechanisms have absolutely failed in appealing to the historical standards of the military-age males in North America and in the United States. Traditionally, it's more conservative-leaning families that are spilling more blood in foreign wars over the last 30 to 40 years than any other demographic in the country. But right now, that is fully out of lockstep. Subsequent to COVID, we've seen massive transfers and massive changes in the way that the military is managed and what sort of curricula are being deployed to train soldiers at home and abroad. There is a crisis in terms of recruitment, and one thing that is needed over there right now to keep this thing going, because money can't pick up a gun physically, right? It can fund them, is bodies. And if the war is going to spread, which is something I've been on the lookout for quite a while, right? Based on what we saw between Israel and Hamas, Israel and Palestine, and this sort of metastatic nature of that conflict based on the interneting of things and social media's clear Wild West aspect right now, particularly on TikTok and the algorithms that we don't understand. This is really troubling in terms of the development that, sure, Norm, perhaps we don't necessarily have to have willing participants wise to what a larger plan or scheme ultimately is. All I'm saying is that it's just interesting that such a massive and complex logistics operation has been mobilized to bring so many hundreds of thousands of people in such an acute period of time to our southern border at the same time as our federal administration, our executive administration, and Congress have absolutely clearly no moral or ethical obligation to the people that put them in office or in their seats, right? And continue to fund additional billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars into a foreign war zone that we're supposed to be defending for purposes of democracy and the expansion of democracy, except we're reporting right now, Norm, on their continuation of martial law, and by consequence, the cancellation of their presidential election indefinitely. There is no plan. 6 months after the war is when they can have an election in Ukraine. So all of this to me is a little too coincidental for me to say, hey, like to qualify it as a conspiracy. I'm just asking the question based on the movement of a lot of things. It is macroscopic, and I understand that I'm far from intelligent enough to pinpoint, who's pulling what strings, but it does seem that there's enough macro movement to at least ask the question of how these things are connected.
I didn't mean you don't have to defend your intelligence. I think everybody who listens to you here knows you bring a lot to the table. Let's just keep an eye out on it. I mean, I would be stunned if a result of the recent events is that quote unquote illegal immigrants get conscripted and have a chance to earn their way to citizenship by bleeding in Ukraine. Boy, if that happens, I doubt many people would really care, candidly. But I'd be stunned. Let's see what happens. Hey, we were going to talk about a new essay by Adam Elwanger on reparations. I guess we'll save it to tomorrow because we're beyond the half an hour mark. I want to remind people again that the reparations movement is really a form of power struggle between changing demographic groups, and that there is a serious discussion going on in the United States about whether we should be required to pay as a society reparations to African American descendants of slaves. Mike and I have gotten behind a constitutional amendment to ban race-based transfer payments, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next time.
And I may be able to swing Adam on the stream tomorrow morning. He's typically very responsive, and I never give him a heads up, except for just a very brief one this morning on X when we're going to cover one of his pieces. But he's typically very willing to come and talk. And
come on down, Adam. We'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, homework for everybody right now is to go to the American Mind, AmericanMind.org. and find reparations by other means. It loops in, sort of the introductory stuff is about Roger Goodell and the NFL and the question of when sort of the auxiliary features of the NFL's presentation of its product is going to be staffed by the same proportion of
60% of NFL players are black. Why aren't 60% of media people covering it black? And why aren't 60% of people cleaning toilets black? And why aren't 60% of them serving chili on the chili dogs at the thing? And why aren't 60% of them hot dog seller, or in the parking lot? Oh my God, on and on it goes. This unctuous luxury tax that makes every transaction in the market more tedious, more expensive, more time consuming, and from the standpoint of those inclined to a certain form of populism, more outrageous. If you want to understand Trump's appeal in the presidential race, read the Elwanger piece. I'm tired of having my consciousness raised every time I go into a restroom and the attendant says black or white. I just want something that works,
Likewise. Just to fly out of here really quickly, I think Imperius says your hourly rate is $2,000 an hour. You can only afford to give us 30 minutes. I don't know that that's true. If it was 2,000,
Imperius, I'm noting your comments and the book you recommended that I read on the Divine Right of Kings, and you have read, apparently, or so you say, Locke's first treatise. This notion of Christian nationalism or divine right of kings and whatnot, and where rights come from, is a serious discussion that we will have on Law and Legitimacy. I haven't read the book you've recommended yet, but I hear you and I want to address you on terms that show respect. And $2,000 an hour, you want to be my new office manager? I'm in.
I'm getting a raise. All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow. You can find us on X at LawPod Daily, YouTube at LawPod Daily. And for those of you that are stuck over there on Rumble, even though they treat us like trash, at Law and Legitimacy, you can also find every day's stream available for audio-only download on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, and wherever you find premium podcasts. Norm, I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Ciao.
Bye.